Hi everyone, welcome to our CANOVI Farm Club. Today we're going to be talking about the results of our heat tolerant lettuce trial this year, which we continued from a previous year. So today we're going to be talking about the results of the CANOVI lettuce trial, and specifically we're going to be talking about the background of the trial, some results, and also have some farmer speakers speak on their participation this year. So we're going to have someone on the research side, from the organization side, as well as the farmer growers that participated in this trial. Next slide. So while we're meeting virtually today, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land from coast to coast, which we all call home. So I'm calling in from Toronto, which is Treaty 13 territory, and it's the native land and unceded territories to various Indigenous nations like the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and likely many more diverse First Nations people. And whenever we engage with variety trials and seeds and the land, especially now that we're wrapping up the season, it's good that we can acknowledge that we're doing all of this on the ancestral and unceded territories of various Indigenous peoples whose land is native to them. And it's a privilege to be on this land and do what we're all doing and care for it in a way that hopefully future generations can live and play and grow on it in the future. And so in this webinar, we're going to be talking a lot about climate and seeds and future growing seasons. So I've just would love if everyone can consider how we can continue to care for this land in a way that many before us have, but also how we can live and farm as good treaty people with Indigenous folks. Next slide. And so just for a quick schedule of today, we're going to be talking about the background of how this trial came to be, 2020, and then we're going to be talking about results from 2024 and how those compare to 2023. We're also going to be talking about some trial feedback that we heard from growers, and some observations that growers took away from these trials. And then we're going to be doing a session where we can hear from growers about their experience, as well as a Q&A that involves everyone. Yeah, so some of you may know, or some of you may not know what CANOVI is. It's basically the Canadian Organic Vegetable Improvement Project, which aims to trial different vegetables that are priority to different growers, and how they perform in different on-farm conditions across Canada. And with that, we prioritize trialing open pollinated crops as well as new breeding material or crops that are of interest to growers so that we can trial these varieties, get agronomic data, see which varieties are doing well and which ones may need more breeding improvement. So that way we can get all this agronomic information that's important for growers, but also build capacity for saving more seed and adapting that seed to the diverse climates across Canada. And the reason why we are working with heat tolerant lettuce is because lettuce and leafy greens was a priority crop identified by growers as that we work with as part of the Bauta Initiative, but also it was a priority crop that funders prioritized. And so one of the biggest traits that growers mentioned having issues with was being able to grow lettuce during hot conditions, as lettuce is such a marketable crop throughout the season, but as we all likely know, uh, lettuce bolts very quickly when it gets really hot. And so we wanted to try different varieties that would work well for growers, for a variety of traits. So next slide. So all the varieties that you see here are varieties that we identified as ones that had the least options for what heat tolerant varieties were available. And all these varieties were either suggestions from growers as ones that they liked, but didn't know how well they performed in the heat, as well as some some of these varieties being advanced breeding lines that growers were working on or working to do regional adaptation with the seed that they were stewarding. So all the checks that we trialed out of the 12 varieties were ones that growers said that they liked to grow. And then the other ones that aren't checks were ones that growers liked but weren't sure about their heat tolerant qualities. So the 8 top green varieties were the ones that every grower who participated in CANOVI had to grow, with the 4 red bottom ones being optional as an oak leaf. So these were all the varieties that were included as part of this trial that growers ended up trialing. Next slide. And from here, I'm just going to pass it off to our resident CANOVI researcher, Weijia, who is going to speak a bit about the trial results and compare those trial results across the 2 years that we've been doing the heat-tolerant lettuce trials.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to show you the locations of the participants in this lettuce trial. On the right hand of the slide are the maps from 2023 and 2024 that we screenshot from SeedLink, showing us where the growers are located, and the tables showing us how many growers, the number of growers that submitted completed trials. As you can see here, we had more growers in 2023 and less growers in 2024. And you can also have an idea like how many growers we had in each region, representing each region. Next slide, please. So for the results, first I want to show you again. This is screenshot from SeedLink showing us the votes that from growers answering whether they want to grow this variety or not. So each so from top to bottom are the 3 different market classes, and from left to right is the ones voted yes. The most votes for yes, and these to the right. So these results here are from 2024, this year, but I can tell you it's very similar to the results we got from 2023. As you can see, the varieties that got the highest votes for yes, they want to grow them again, are the same as last year. And the rest of the varieties, the ranking of the rest of the varieties are about the same, with some slight changes that we will have the details in our report. One thing I want to bring up is for the Butter King in the Butterhead market class, it did have a 10% of increase in the votes. We changed the seed source this year actually because we were not able to find enough seeds from the previous seed resource. So it's a different seed resource, and we do see an increase of the percentage of growers who like to grow it again. There was also an increase for the Bronze Beauty Arrowhead in the oak leaf market class. It's the same seed resource, but it has performed better in this year. So more growers voted to want to grow this again this year. So now it has the same percentage actually as the BC Rosa. So they both have 73% of growers voted for them. Yeah. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I know it's a lot of data. You don't have to look at it, all the data. We will have the table in our report. So in the future, in case you are interested in any specific variety of any specific agronomic traits, you can always go back to it to check on what's the average rating score for each of them. Here I listed the results by 2023 and 2024 separately, was because according to my statistical analysis, year-to-year difference was detected for the rating. But that doesn't mean every variety had year-to-year difference. So I highlighted the one that actually had a significant difference from 2023 to 2024. As you can see here, Butter King, as I mentioned, we changed the seed resource this year. So there was an increase in germination rate, vigor, the non-marketability, and the overall performance. But changing the seed resource is not the only factor that would make the difference, because we also see some significant change for Butter Crunch Bib. It had increase in rating for vigor and marketability and overall performance. And if we look at the oak leaf market class, the Bronze Beauty Arrowhead had an increase in flavor rating, and oak leaf Quebec also had an increase in flavor rating. And unfortunately, the oak leaf Alberta had a decrease in germination. With that, can we go to the next slide, please? So after looking at the average scores, I also want to show you what are exactly the ratings from each of the growers. As you can see here, so I made these violin plots to show you the actual data distributions. The y-axis is our range of the rating from 1 to 5, and the x-axis has the 12 different varieties. So ideally, we would want to see that there will be some varieties that only have the high ratings, and some have the all the ratings being grouped in the bottom, something like that. If the reality is like that, it's gonna make my life much easier because it's gonna be so easy to tell which one is good, which one is bad. But in reality, as you can see here, for most of them, you can find ratings from 1 to 5. But I know as growers, you probably are still very interested into the answer to the question of which variety is the best. So what we can tell here is Magenta has been the winner for both years, as it has tend to have more higher ratings. So this plot showing you the ratings for overall performance. So Magenta has most higher ratings, range from 3 to 5. And in the Butterhead market class, Sangria tend to have more higher ratings. And in the Oak Leaf, we had Bronze Beauty Arrowhead had more higher ratings. And next slide, I'm gonna show you the germination rates. So when we look at the germination, the results is more interesting because the Magenta, as our best overall performer, it actually does not have a consistent germination rate. You can see here the ratings for the germination rate of Magenta actually almost evenly distributed from 2 to 5. However, we do have some varieties that have more consistent high germination rates. For example, the Gentilina and the Bronze Beauty, I think, the Grouse Brown Parasues. And unfortunately, the Red Oak Leaf Alberta had been having low germination rates through the 2 years. So next slide, I think, yeah, I have the bot resistance ratings, because the bot resistance is the most important factor that we are trialing these varieties for. As you can see here, the Magenta does have very good bot resistance, and Sangria and Butter Crunch Babe also had this consistent good bot resistance according to all the growers. And I believe that's my last slide. Yeah, so in general, I think there is not one variety that would be suitable for everyone at every location, but we do want to show you all the pros and cons of each variety so you can make a more informed decision on your own. Yeah, that's all I want to show today. We will have more detailed results in our report. If you are interested, you can always check on our reports.
Yeah, so kind of what Weijia mentioned, depending on the variety, they showed variability in performance depending on the environment. So where she showed certain varieties had really strong germination in some environments, if you're in a situation where germination is the most important trait for you, because you need to germinate your lettuce in order to even have lettuce, then maybe you want to prioritize a lettuce that has a really high germination versus if you care more about bolt resistance, for example, which Magenta showed, it may be a trade-off for you, like a trade-off you're willing to do to have Magenta, which had a more variable germination, but a really high bolt resistance. And that kind of ties into a lot of the feedback that we got from growers who mentioned that climate variability and extremes was the most common issue that caused them issues when trying to do this lettuce variety trial. So that could be issues in how they germinated their lettuce, how well that lettuce was able to grow in fluctuating temperatures or weather conditions. And the variations in heat specifically was commonly mentioned as a reason for growers finding their lettuce to be tough or bitter, even if a lettuce made it to maturity. And this shows when you see how well a variety performed in terms of bolt resistance and then like the trade-off in flavor. And so some growers mentioned like a way that they were able to avoid that was to harvest the lettuce a week earlier or cut the lettuce for cut lettuce. The way that this trial was designed, we asked growers to harvest for head lettuce. So that often can maybe make you wait a couple of days before you're ready to harvest that. But yeah, that seemed like a very good solution that growers were able to find in order still to get good lettuce in hot conditions. But yeah, a lot of growers mentioned also being able to find new varieties that they want to incorporate into their farms in the future, and they were able to have fun and learn something new while participating. So next slide. Yeah, and like we mentioned, Weijia mentioned earlier, the results of this report are not ready yet, but they'll likely be ready by the end of this week. What we were able to show you today in the presentation was just some highlights of some interesting things that we found from the results, but that will be ready again by the end of the week. For growers who participated in CANOVI this year, if you haven't already submitted your invoice for participating in the trial, we are still accepting them. So send them our way anytime. And we also just want to give the big disclaimer of just because the national results say something about a variety, or we say that one variety did better than another, what works for you is what works best on your farm and what you personally like for yourself or for your market. As you probably could tell from the graph that we showed, there was a lot of variability in how growers rated different varieties. So if you found a variety perform really well for you and you really like it, stick with that variety if you want to grow that for yourself or for your markets. And if you ever want to compare how your ratings compared to what we found on a national level, if you go on Seedlinks, that data is always available for you to refer back to. So you're not only limited to working with what results we found, you were able to do the variety trial and also find your own results. And speaking of growers finding their own results. Next slide. We just want to invite some growers who participated in the trial to speak a bit about their experience. Yeah, so like some prompts that we were interested in hearing about were like if you learned anything particularly stand out from this trial, or if there's any aspect of CANOVI you could change, or just anything from your experience that you feel was important or interesting to share. Valerie, did you want to go first?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry, I wasn't that prepared to answer those questions, and my English is not that good, but I'll do my best to talk about that. Well, the climate this year was kind of funny with big extremes compared to the last year. So I was expecting to see lettuce bolting, but that wasn't the case that much. So in the varieties that I tried, only the Gentilina was lower in the rate, but the other varieties were all good for that. And well, it's gonna help me to select the varieties on my farm. I am in the north of Quebec in a 3B hardiness zone. So my the standout, the lettuces that are standing out this year and last year were the Batavian ones. These are real good, the good ones for us, for the taste and as well as for the market. We are organic grower, and we are doing mostly CSA baskets for the people in our community. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say. Let me see the questions. Maybe.
No, that's okay. That was great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And was there any aspect of the trial that you think would suit your growing, like what you could take away from it better, or like suit your farm conditions better, or do you think like you got a good experience from it?
Well, it was a good experience. Maybe I would try to select 5 or 6 the best varieties for me, and then work around that, and maybe identify some others varieties, especially with the other varieties, the Batavian, because the green ones it wasn't that good on our farm, especially for the taste. It was bitter. I think Butter King was bitter in flavor. Yeah, as well as Cougar too and Butter Crunch. So it seems like the green ones for us are not that good. So I would like to try maybe find a green one that is as good as the Batavian.
Okay, so flavor is another like important
Yeah.
trait. Okay, cool. Thanks. Brendolyn, would you like to share your experience?
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. Well, I was gardening on the cusp of zone 2A, 2B in central northern Saskatchewan. We had a very late spring, more later than usual. We had snow towards the middle part of June as well, so that kind of held up a lot of things. Didn't do well for my tomatoes, but it worked well for the lettuce trial. We didn't have too many mishaps, and I think the lettuce really enjoyed the cool weather. I would say that most of the varieties turned out quite well for us. We don't sell the lettuce. We provide to the community in various ways. We have a lot of seniors in the community, and they tend to be drawn to the true green lettuce type. So a lot of the Butter Crunch and Butterhead varieties were really their favorite, and it took a little challenge pushing gently to get them to try some other colors. but I'm really happy that we were able to kind of push that diversity in that age range. So I'm happy about that. In addition to climate issues, I would say that we encountered some animal challenges as well. I usually start my seedlings in my greenhouse and then put them out. This year we had to put netting as kind of row cover. And then when that didn't work because the rabbits and the deer found all the lettuce varieties quite tasty, we ended up putting a plain white row cover and sealing those down like Fort Knox. So we were able to get some results coming through, and we were pretty pleased with all of the outcomes. I would say that we did like the magenta and the sangria for sure. Those really came to the top, so I'm glad to see that that was kind of consistent for us across all pieces. Butterhead as well, didn't find it bitter as well, as Valerie had mentioned. It came through quite well. We are zero till here. So I do have about 24 inches of northern pine chips within my rows. So the consistency of water, we did not do any additional irrigation on this. It was solely reliant on the weather. And there were some periods of significant drought tolerance here that came through in the plants. So I'm pretty happy with how the trial went overall. I would say that the ones that I maybe wouldn't try again would be in the oak leaf zone. Just Bronze Beauty and Bichorosa, they seem to have bolted pretty quickly when they finally did come along. And I did try and keep them as long as I could for the head requirement of the trial, but they just got ahead of me in the whole mix of things. So. And somebody had mentioned in the comments about storage. I have to say the Butterhead varieties stored the best for me, wrapped in paper towels and just in thin plastic in the fridge. They lasted for weeks. So that might just be me here. But anyway, I think that's it.
Cool. Yeah, and you mentioned like the way that you distribute your lettuce, the folks that you work with seem to be more interested in the more greener lettuce compared to the red. That being said, like, would you agree with like what Valerie was saying, what she would like to try more in that kind of category? Or do you think like it's still good to have the two different types for those interested?
Absolutely. And when I was cutting the lettuce and handing it out or dropping it off at people's homes, I would include the colored lettuce in there. They didn't have a choice to not take it. So anyway, I kind of chalked that up to an effort on diversification on my front. So I think they ate it all. I think it's good.
Cool. And like while I have both of you here, one of the questions that on the CANOVI planning side of the team, we've been wondering whether growers would be interested in continuing this lettuce trial for a third year, potentially like doing a different variety list, as like both of you mentioned, or would you be interested in moving on to another crop? We're internally thinking bok choy, but we wanted to ask this farm club what their thoughts would be. And like anyone in the chat, if you've done the trial and you want to keep going with lettuce, let us know. But if not, yeah, we're also open to those thoughts.
I do traditionally grow 3 varieties of bok choy and pak choy every early spring before the heat comes on here in my garden area. So I'd be open to that, but I'm always up for lettuce or whatever. So all good.
Yeah, Valerie, did you have any thoughts on that, or are you still thinking?
Yeah, I would like to try to continue with the lettuce trial. And I'm always open to try new kind of veggies. Like we did try yellow beans for 3 years in a row. As well, carrots were only 1 year trial, but yeah, I really enjoy the trials for the carrots. So that might be another one to try too.
Cool. And you know, both of you mentioned climate variability, and I know that this trial, the focus was on heat tolerance. And so sometimes it's tricky because if you don't have super hot weather, it's kind of hard to know if you're actually what you're trialing is actually heat tolerance or could it be something else? But like with the climate variability, is there something on your farm specifically that you is like a trait of interest you really focus on as well as like when you're looking at heat tolerance? Like Valerie mentioned flavor and that's something that's also really important to her, but are there any like things like Brendolyn, you mentioned like drought resistance is something that you were looking at. Yeah, are there any traits that maybe we didn't focus on that you think would be important?
No, I think the traits that you had selected for the trial were very appropriate from our end of things as well, and flavor's already always a key factor, but I don't think there's anything else I'd maybe add. I know I commented on my wild animals attacking my garden and things like that, but I don't really think that's something that is really a key factor for everywhere, and you know, we can manage that here.
Great. Valerie, did you have any thoughts on that, or was the flavor the most important?
Yeah, was the most important for me, and I think that all of the other characteristics that we did rate are overall a lot of data. So I think that's great like that. Yeah.
Great. I actually am going to invite Chris to this chat. Chris was the one that ran the lettuce trial at UBC, which is like our mother CANOVI site where we do replicated trials. And I'd love like Chris for you to just share your experience on, I mean, after hearing growers' experience, like potentially how did that compare to the UBC site?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to highlight would be the weather differences between 2023 and 2024. 2023 here was extremely hot. So it was a really good year for testing heat tolerance. And we did see, I don't think we saw issues so much in bolting. Everything made it to a harvestable state. Which was quite impressive considering we were expecting a lot of stuff to not do well. But where we did see things were things like scorch and leaf damage and stuff because of the heat. So stuff not bolting, but seeing that damage last year. So this year, there's two aspects that had changed for us. One is that it was not as hot as it was last year, and two, our stuff got transplanted out later than last year. So I think it's difficult to compare the two on a year-to-year basis because there was so much difference in that regard. But I did notice some consistency between which performed well and which ones didn't. Like the other growers, the Batavians did really well here. Magenta was definitely a standout. That's BC grown seed, so maybe that's why there's a little bit of adaptability there. And then Butter King, I don't remember the flavor off the top of my head, but I know it suffered quite badly from scorch both years. So last year quite badly, this year not as bad, but definitely had it more so than any of the other varieties. Yeah, so I think that idea of are we just trialing lettuce, that's different than trialing heat tolerance in lettuce. So the fact that we got that hot year last year was a good look. This year, I don't think maybe was as good a look, but we did see some consistency of where there might be some sensitivities to the to heat. So I mean, I like the idea of doing another year of the lettuce just to see again if we can get stuff planted out, like just pick the worst time to plant it out in terms of heat to really push that heat tolerance. But my impression so far is actually, I think when we went into this trial from a research point of view, we were like, oh, like there's not a lot of stuff out there. But what this trial showed is like the stuff that the Canadian grown stuff that we have is standing up to the heat pretty well. So that was really encouraging. I think that one is showing that growers are hopefully or probably doing good selection. So, roguing out the stuff that is maybe getting more damage from the heat or bolting earlier. And I think it's interesting with the Butter King, because if I recall, it's a Canadian bred variety that was particularly bred for the heat. And it's the one that I saw that suffered the most. So part of me is like, oh, but it could just been like, again, that variety dates back to like the mid to late 1960s, and a lot can change within that time in terms of regional selection and things like that. So hard to know all the factors that are contributing to that. I think, Brenda Lynn, you had mentioned you weren't as fond of the oak leaves. The oak leaves I found did pretty well here. The red oak leaves from Quebec and Alberta were a little slower for sure, and definitely had some germination issues. But the Bisquia rosa, in particular, I think is one of the most like amazing lettuces. The way they grew here, they looked like this beautiful cascading waterfall. So I thought, presentation-wise, it was one of the nicest lettuces I had ever seen. So I'd be excited about growing that for the market in the future. So yeah, that I'd say sums things up pretty well here.
Cool. And I think like an interesting thread that everyone mentioned was being able to time when you plant your lettuce to a time that's actually hot. And other growers in like their feedback mentioned that timing, and specific growers have mentioned phenology and how like, like you usually start germinating your lettuce at the end of the spring for summer production. Because ideally that's when it's hot, but then now in the summers, it's not always hot. And like growers have to kind of make a decision point of do I just like wait the lettuce out, or should I just plant it now? And I like with CANOVI, we're flexible. We just say like do whatever works best on your farm. But yeah, now it's like a more challenging thing of like the time you expect to be hot isn't hot anymore. Um, yeah, and I think like we've been trying to think of ways to adapt to that. Yeah, because growers have been saying like, what do I do if it's not hot? But yeah, I think like we've been trying to get more climate data and hear like individual conditions on farms so that we can match that climate data to the agronomic data. But it's yeah, really complicated. Wonderful. Are there any other growers in the chat that have any experiences they'd like to share? Lisa mentioned that she'd be interested in doing lettuce again because most of the first year the lettuce died from an extreme heat wave. Yeah, okay, so I'm getting the vibe that people would be interested in doing it for a third year. Yeah, and like, does anyone in the room generally have any questions about CANOVI results in general, or questions for our growers, or questions from the UBC research side?
I do actually have a general question for any of the growers who are here. Because something Brenda Lynn said about the pests and the deer being maybe not a problem everywhere kind of is making me think. I had a couple growers that I talked to that mentioned that unprompted, that they had different pest issues this year or more than normal. So I'm wondering if maybe it is something that is getting like more inconsistent or is popping up in different ways in other areas.
So I can speak about it from a research end. Yeah, okay, so this slide was hidden originally. The reason why we hid it was because for disease and pest resistance, this year was our first year looking at these results because it wasn't included in the previous year. But yeah, like Sarah mentioned, a lot of growers were saying we had disease issues, we had pest issues, so we included it in this year's trial. What we found was that variety did not have a significant effect on disease or pest resistance. So no specific variety did better or worse. But I think the interesting thing is that you can still see variability in how different varieties held up to disease and pests. So I think if you grow lettuce in an environment where you have high disease and pest pressure, maybe you would want to avoid varieties that growers reported having kind of that worst tolerance. But I think the other thing that kind of complicates interpreting these results is that some growers mentioned that they had a lot of uh, safeties in place to prevent pests or animals from eating their lettuce. So a lot of people had insect netting, some people grew in tunnels. But yeah, there were like a sizable amount of growers who mentioned, yeah, deers were eating lettuce and things like that. Which like some of those unique experiences are included in the report that we'll be publishing sometime this week. So yeah, I think if this is something of interest, especially for growers who have that high pest and disease risk, we can incorporate that next year in the protocol to kind of like give a bit more attention to that. But yeah, it wasn't significant. But yeah, to me it was interesting because like, for example, especially with disease issues, especially fungal ones, like once it's in your lettuce, as long as it appears, it can very easily spread. So maybe to prevent that, you want to grow a variety of lettuce that wouldn't get or will only be susceptible to those diseases later, closer to harvest rather than earlier in the season. Yeah, this is an interesting thing we found that we did not share originally.
That's really cool. Yeah, I didn't realize this was a new trait that we tracked this year. That's neat. I'm gonna pay attention next year and see if anything else emerges.
I noticed Sol has a question in the chat. Curious about how to get involved in the trial, but also whether this trial fit well with growers' overall like business and how it fit into your farm model. I don't know if there's any growers on the call. For those of us who grow food and end up donating it to the food bank, it's pretty easy to fit it into our, production cycle. But if there's any growers here that are market gardeners that are trying to sell these varieties, that may be what Sol is asking about.
Yeah, good point, David. It was very easy for me to rotate it into my zero-till rows because I had finished with cold crops of spring, and like the pak choys and the kale and the spinach had already come out, and so it was a logical rotation for me to add in the lettuce seedlings here. So, but I don't grow for the purpose of selling. So, thanks.
I'll comment quickly from UBC Farms perspective. I mean, we are a research farm, but we are also a commercial farm where product does go to market. And so the way it works here is once we've done our assessments, and we actually do sort of 2 final assessments, which give us a sense of how long the heads stay in a harvestable state. So, I mean, this week everything might get a 5, but within a week, everything might go down to a 3, for example, if it bolts or gets a bunch of damage. But after that second assessment, the farm actually goes and harvests everything and either takes it to the market or puts it in the CSA box. So most stuff in this case is still able to get used. So it is basically kind of worked into their production rotation where they to a degree rely on these as part of their revenue. They with the understanding there could be some loss if there's challenges or something does bolt, and they might have gotten that out earlier, but we had to let it bolt because it was still within this sort of evaluation period. So that's, yeah, I think we're still able to basically see the revenue from the lettuce after assessment.
Yeah, and just speaking about it from a programmatic side, if you're a grower who's interested in participating in CANOVI, usually we start recruiting for CANOVI in late February, early March. And we usually have like a cap number of the amount of growers that we include. So we usually just say like, if you're interested, sign up as soon as possible. And yeah, like Chris mentioned, everything that growers grow, you can use it for whatever purpose you want. As well as growers receive a stipend for participating. So if you're able to plant everything, you get like the first tier, but if you have a crop failure, that is okay. There's no penalty. But then if you're able to get to the harvest stage and submit data, yeah, you'll get a stipend, usually around $300 at the end of the season. And I think we can share a link to our website where you can sign up or find a contact for your region to hear about those opportunities when they arise. In the past, like we've had different types of crops that we've variety trialed. So last year we did carrots and lettuce. This year we just did lettuce. And you know, I mentioned potentially doing bok choy, but yeah, as the years go on, we may add different variety trials. So lettuce isn't the only trial that is available. Yeah, and I think so you also had another question on methods and how we collect data. So we try to create a protocol for how the variety trial will happen on farm. But we do try to leave a lot of the protocol up to the growers, again, because we want growers to be able to integrate the variety trial into their existing operations so that the variety trial can happen with the least amount of effort and with the least amount of issues within a grower's operations. But yeah, I just sent a link in the chat to the Bauta CANOVI website, so all the information you need should be available there. Cool, then that might be it.